Hey kids, it's me, E.H. Ivins. This is another edition of A Radical Reset. Okay, so where to begin today? We're going to talk about what's coming. And let me begin by saying I have no fucking idea what's coming, neither does anybody else, but I know trouble when I see it, and how it manifests is going to be the only variable. Now, you will find in the link below a link to an earlier podcast I did back in early May, where, or actually it was March, I should say, not early May, it was March. I think it was March the 18th. On March the 18th, where I said, as this whole COVID thing was ramping up, be cool, wait, be calm, let's not act before we think. But of course, that was unreasonable. Now before I go any further, let's just do a quick review of what anti-politism is at its core. At its core, anti-politism, by taking the politics out of the equation, politics as in the hurling of mud and the complete disregard of issues and the raising of millions of dollars for jobs that pay thousands of dollars, if we get all of that out of the way and we get rid of the leftism and the rightism and the socialism and the capitalism and everything in between, and we just talk as rational human beings who are serving out of duty in a Congress made up of people of achievement, we are going to be pragmatists. In other words, whatever works. You know, as long as it doesn't trample on the personal liberty of anybody and your right to choose what to do with yourself in any given situation. And I know that opens up an entire line of discussion, which we are not going to get into the abortion issue today. I know that the word choice is a key on that. Be cool. But generally speaking, as long as it doesn't tread on the rights of an individual, then we should consider all points of view when we deal with all problems and what we should do about it. So here we are, and we're faced with a genuine pandemic. Now look, I don't want to get into a bullshit argument over whether the virus is real. I go on Facebook and I go into the various groups on Facebook, and the libertarian groups and the socialist groups and the right-wing groups and the left-wing groups, and there is an enormous body of people out there who believe in kooky conspiracy shit and completely disregard all science and factual reason. Now, so let's try to agree as reasonable people, just talking between ourselves, just between you and me, on what the truth of this really is. So what's become clear now is that COVID is a genuine pandemic, about 10 times more lethal than the flu. I'm 63 years old. The flu. Here's the thing. It's constantly being compared with, it doesn't kill any more people than the flu. Look, COVID-19 has been around for about now, depending on when you think it first broke out, let's say it started in January, okay? So here I am, and I'm speaking to you in May, okay? So we're talking 5 months. In 5 months, in the United States, 100,000 people in round numbers have been killed. That is more than the flu kills in the course of an entire year. COVID is much more contagious, and we have no natural resistance to it. It is a pandemic. Now, it's a fortunate pandemic. When I say that it's a fortunate pandemic, is that if we were to look at this objectively, we would view COVID as a gigantic favor to us all, as a wake-up call of what could happen if we got a genuinely, horribly lethal pandemic. In other words, the definition of pandemic isn't that it has to be killing everybody in sight, although past pandemics in past centuries have in fact killed, like the Black Plague, everybody in sight. Now, this particular pandemic, the COVID pandemic, deadly as it is, has been a blessing in some ways because it's killed the people that were on their way out, and I'm being very broadly general, but I'm being very direct. I'm having a discussion. Remember, let's just imagine for a moment, divorce yourself from your current reality, wherever you're sitting, whatever you're doing, and say to yourself, I'm sitting in the Congress. I am an anti-political, an anti-politist selected to serve in the Congress. And now I'm having a discussion with, my mentor. Think of me as your mentor at this point. We're having a discussion, and we're going to concede that COVID is a real pandemic. It's not the Black Plague, thank God, and it's not a pandemic, most of all, that kills children. We got very, very lucky. COVID is essentially harmless to all but the most at-risk, preemie, horrible conditions, sick children. And, cold as it is, the people that are dying from COVID are either elderly and have significant underlying conditions or younger, with some exceptions. For example, doctors and nurses, frontline people who really deserve an enormous, hats off, have died because they're being multiply exposed. So instead of one exposure, they're being exposed and exposed and exposed and exposed, and we have no natural immunity to this virus, and so consequently it kills even the healthy. Although Very rarely, okay? In most cases, COVID is killing the elderly with either lung disease, heart disease, or diabetes, or it's killing other people in other age groups that are already suffering from some underlying thing that was going to kill them in the next year anyway. So in a way, COVID was a blessing in that it woke us up, I hope it woke us up, to the dangers of a real pandemic and what could happen down the road and what will happen down the road. A real pandemic is not an if, it's a when. Now, it might happen in the next month, and it might happen in the next 10 years, and it might happen in the next 100 years. But it is good that we got a wake-up call and are preparing ourselves, hopefully, this time for the next pandemic. Now, in dealing with this pandemic, both the Republicans and the Democrats, of course, have been slaughtering each other and, calling each other names. And they immediately patted each other on the back, and they almost unanimously voted in the beginning this enormous $3 trillion expenditure, including these $1,200 payments and enhanced unemployment benefits. So I want to talk about what's been done and why waiting would have been so smart. So they rushed, in a rush to show the American public that we're doing something, and in an unbelievable popular move, they passed this act of, throwing enormous amounts of money at it. Was it a good thing? Okay. And by the way, I got my $1,200. I'm sure you got yours too. And, a lot of people, I run into people all the time who are living on the enhanced unemployment benefits. But here's the thing. It was really poorly thought out and stupid. By the way, as a general rule of thumb, the more Congress people vote for something in a bipartisan fashion, the more likely it is it's wrong. Okay, it's a general rule of politics. In other words, when you get near unanimous consent on anything, it's going to be a fuck up. They unanimously damn near consented to go into Afghanistan, 20 years ago, and we're still sitting there stuck in that morass. Unanimous consent, everyone agrees, it's popular. One of the problems with democracy as we practice it today is there's too much poll watching. A lot of people need to be led as opposed to represented, in the sense that, yes, their basic desire should be represented and protected, but they don't really, most of us don't really know where to go next. We're looking to our representatives to also lead us and educate us, which of course they don't do, because they're also busy reading polls. They're trying to pander to us. But an anti-politics Congress wouldn't pander, it would lead. And in this case, it would say to you, and I would say to you, if I were the speaker, let's say, of the Antipolitist House, which I will never be, but just in this example, I would say to you, look, the wise course of action, when this first broke out, the wise course of action would have been to take on the Swedish point of view, which would basically be, let's isolate the most at risk as quickly as possible. Let's isolate the elderly and the very sick, the premature born young children in the NICU units. That's the neonatal ICUs. That's what NICU stands for. I don't want to use acronyms I don't explain. And anyway, and these at-risk people, let's isolate them and let life go on and see what happens. What would have happened if we would have said wait and see as opposed to what we did? Okay, what we did is spend $3 trillion. We send everybody a $1,200 check, which stimulates nothing. Now, look, I was happy to get mine. I replaced the timing belt on my Toyota 4Runner and the water pump, which was an $1,169 job, so it was a miraculously paid for. I would have done it, but see, here's the point. I would have done it anyway. I had to do it. The vehicle had as many miles as it could have without replacing the timing belt, and you don't want to let a timing belt break because then you're looking at a $5,000 new engine. So I would have done it anyway. And I think most people, when they got this $1,200, either paid off debt, which they would have eventually gotten to one way or another anyway, or they spent it on something they were going to buy anyway. In other words, the history on stimulus, when President Obama tried this exact same thing with $900 per person after the crash of 2008, it didn't work, and this isn't going to work either. So that roughly $600 billion, $650 billion that we sent out in checks, it's just gone. I mean, I'm sure we were all happy to get it. I was happy to get it. No one turns down a freebie, but it's gone. Now what we're left with now is the other parts of it, which is, part of it is this enhanced unemployment. Well, what we're finding out through the enhanced unemployment is that it's a disincentive to work. In other words, when you add $600 a week on top of normal unemployment, which is what the enhanced unemployment benefit is. So in other words, in the state of California, for example, and I live in Arizona, but I lived for many years in California, and I know the laws there, so I'm going to use them as an example. I actually know the California law better than the Arizona law. The maximum unemployment benefit per week is $450. Now, if you were collecting $450 a week in California, or roughly $1,800 a month, I'm using 4 weeks, not 4.5 weeks, really it's more like $1,900 and $2,000 a month. Let's call it $2,000. If you're collecting $2,000 a month in unemployment benefits in California, particularly in Southern California, you can't live. California is much more expensive than $2,000 a month is going to provide to live well. I mean, you might be able to live in a subsistence level, but not well. But if you add, but $2,000 a month is $24,000 a year. Now, if you add $600 a week onto that, okay, you're adding another $30,000 a year on top of the $24,000. You're now raising the income of that person receiving unemployment to $54,000 a year on an annualized basis. Now, I understand it's supposedly going to run out at the end of July, but from now until the end of July, and people are not particularly far looking, millions of employees are saying to themselves, why the fuck would I go back to work in that restaurant serving, or go to work in that hotel, laying towels by the pool, whatever the case might be, whatever the entry-level business is or nominal business is, when I can just stay at home and make the equivalent of $54,000 a year. Why the fuck would I go back to work? And the answer is you wouldn't. So what they did is pass a giant disincentive to work, which is going to slow growth even further, not to mention adding in total of this whole clusterfuck, another $3 trillion to the national debt. Now, not to be outdone, as I'm speaking to you, the Trump administration has signaled to the Democrats in the House that they are willing to meet them halfway and extend these unemployment benefits in some form. Now, there's a smart way to do this, and there's a stupid way to do this. Obviously, the government has a legitimate role. Again, this is abandoning left and right. There's a legitimate government role in helping people get through this time that this is a natural disaster, which to me falls under the term of national defense. This is a legitimate function of the government. But wouldn't it have been smarter if we would have stopped and waited and thought about it to, probably just stick with the Swedish model. As it's turning out, the Swedish model is, which is to say they basically left the country open except for isolating the sickest. They are getting a slightly higher mortality than their neighbors in Denmark and Norway, but not higher than other places in Europe. For example, Italy slaughters them, who went to total lockdown. Granted, the Italians did things less efficiently than the Swedes did, for sure. And there are lots of variables and differences, and it's hard to draw broad conclusions, but would we have been worse off had we done essentially nothing? In other words, isolate people and wait and see. Now, if we did need the support and to keep payrolls alive, let's say that we waited and then we went to the Swedish model, and it turned out in our polyglot society, we're just not Swedes. There are 340 million of everything in the United States versus 5.5 million of one race, one kind of people living in Sweden. So it's not an accurate analogy. It's not an accurate comparison, in other words. So what I'm saying is we would have probably found out we'd have to go to some greater degree of isolation and would have had to have provided some kind of payroll support. But instead of doing it through the government, wouldn't it have been better to simply allow businesses to draw upon grants to subsidize 80% of their payroll? In other words, let the businesses, they've got to pay something. Let the businesses continue to pay the employees 20%, but the government underwrite 80% of the employee's salary to begin with. In other words, don't create a disincentive to work. And if the company didn't want to continue to pay their 20%, then the employee could go home and the company would continue the 80% because it's a grant. In other words, flow the money through private enterprise, not through government. Get the bureaucracy out of the way and don't create an incentive not to work. That would have been the most logical thing to do, but of course that's not what we did, because government can't wait to show itself doing something. And this is what they're doing. They're throwing enormous amounts of money. Plus they're doing things that have nothing to do with the COVID crisis at all. As I speak to you, the Democrats are trying to sneak in tons of what they call state aid. Now, what they're really trying to do is to fix the pension systems of these primarily Democratic-ruled states where they have spent themselves or promised themselves into horrendous financial positions and their deficit. But these deficits have nothing to do with COVID or the pandemic. And these states that have been poorly run, like California and New York, should be allowed to go bankrupt. They should not be bailed out. Failure is a critical part of a free market system, because without failure, you cannot have success. You cannot have up without down. You cannot have light without dark. You cannot have success without failure. If a state like New York can't flush it down the toilet, destroy its credit rating, and really bring hardship upon its people, then its government will not change to something better, and people will not get something better later. And the fact of the matter is, New York has put itself in a terrible position. California has put itself in a terrible position. New Jersey has put itself in a terrible position. Illinois has put itself in a terrible position. But the question is it up to every other state and the taxpayers in all the other states to bail them out? And a Democrat would say to you, well, we're going to earmark this so that they can't use it for pensions. Bullshit. Did any of you believe stuff like that? That they can somehow that they're even paying enough attention to isolate? They're going to, believe me when I tell you, the governing policy of both Democrats and Republicans is that it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. It's easier to do a giant fuck job and then say, whoops, we didn't know, and blame it on somebody else later than it is to avoid it ahead of time. We're in an anti-political legislature. This would have never happened. It would have never happened because it doesn't make any sense. There would have been no federal bailout, okay? And that's what's going on now. We're having a federal bailout, and we're going to go into more debt. Now, to refresh myself on, what's the right word I'm looking for? Well, just on the purity of how free markets work, and reaffirm to myself what's going on, rather than read books, what I did the other day, I did it yesterday actually, is I sat down with YouTube and I binged Milton Friedman. And I binged Milton Friedman on various broadcasts from the Phil Donahue program, which those of you old enough to remember will remember who Phil Donahue was. He was a fairly intellectual talk show host. I think he married Margot Thomas, the lady that does the Danny Thomas's daughter, who does the St. Jude's Hospital commercials, which, by the way, is my favorite charity. And if you're going to donate. If you ever want to know what I do, I donate to St. Jude's. I donate them through my Amazon account. I donate to them personally. I just have a thing for children who are under threat. So anyway, that's me. But anyway, that was a digression. I don't even know why I went there. Having said that, I was watching Milton Friedman, who was at the University of Chicago, God rest his soul, and was a great free market economist. And he reminded me of how things will work out if you just don't do anything at all. Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, problems will solve themselves if you don't act at all. In other words, if you have a natural disaster like the Hurricane Katrina or this COVID crisis, it is appropriate for the government to do certain mitigating, the word is mitigating things, reinforce the dams in Katrina, pump out the water out of New Orleans as quick as they possibly can, and do various things to protect the population and their life and their liberty, okay? But that's not what politicians do. They use it as an excuse to pile on and grab the pork as much as they possibly can. Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats will do it towards the welfare state. The Republicans will do it towards the military-industrial complex. And really, we need a little bit of both, but we don't need as much as we've got. I mean, what would an anti-political legislature do to begin with? Well, the first thing they would do, and we would do, because let's say you and I are serving on it, is we would be shutting down entire federal departments that are just, what's the purpose of them? I mean, why is there a Department of Education? Why is there a Department of Energy? They don't do anything productive. Why is there an Environmental Protection Agency? And don't scream at me that I want to pollute the environment. I don't want to pollute the environment. I think the states can regulate the environment in their own state because they're closer to it. If you're the governor of Pennsylvania and some steel mill is built in Pittsburgh and they start polluting the water, you're going to know it a hell of a lot faster than the president of the United States or the Speaker of the House. Let the states police. I am all for clean water. I am all for clean air, but I'm not for the regulation of the federal bureaucracy because they dress up in pretty words what they do, but in fact they don't do anything but spend our money and waste it and dig us into these deep holes. And most of these problems will self-solve. In other words, if you were to look, let's use the environment as an example. If you were to look at a graph of pollution in the United States, particulate matter from the turn of the last century, the century before last, in other words, from the 1800s to the 1900s, and then look at its progression through the 1900s into the 2000s to today, you would have seen that pollution was precipitously dropping anyway before they created the Environmental Protection Agency in the 1970s. It was going way down anyway. There were strong actions. I was growing up in Pittsburgh, PA. They were cleaning up Pittsburgh way before Jimmy Carter was president of the United States. They were working at it fast. Look, what was lost in what's always lost in the arguments of the evil industrialists polluting our world is like they breathe different air, right? Like Andrew Carnegie, would somehow breathe different air than the poor working schlub in the steel mill, okay? That's just not the way it works. The fact of the matter is everybody, rich or poor, breathes the same air, drinks the same water, lives on the same land. So rich people want things clean just as much as poor people do, and they make a cost-benefit judgment. And when the technology came on in the 1960s to scrub the smokestacks and clean the water coming out of steel mills, I'm using the Pittsburgh example, that it was installed and it was regulated by the state of Pennsylvania originally and put on before the feds ever had any idea. It would have happened anyway. So in other words, the billions that we spend on the EPA, the billions that we spend, the Department of Education has only made education get worse. The Department of Commerce is promoting American business as if American business can't promote itself. I mean, come on now. I mean, we have federal departments doing things that are completely unnecessary. Department of the Interior, all that land should belong to the state it's in, and let the state regulate and take care of the land and decide how to husband. And what, do you think that, for example, in my state, in Arizona, do you think that we're going to sell the Grand Canyon if it becomes state land instead of federal land? Or do you think the governor of Arizona knows what the Grand Canyon is, which is an enormous draw, a tourism draw, and will move quickly to improve the facilities and improve the experience of people going to the Grand Canyon? It just makes sense. The same thing's true whether you're going to Yellowstone in Wyoming or you're going to Yosemite in California or wherever it is that you love to go. The Adirondack Mountains in the east, hike the Alleghenies, do whatever it is that you like to do. It can be better done at the state level, and these federal bureaucracies can all get shut down. And what an anti-political Congress would do, by the way, is to take all those employees that work for those agencies and cut. Let me back up. The average federal agency spends a third of its budget on salaries, payrolls, pensions, so on and so forth, and 2/3 on whatever it is it's supposed to be doing, which it does basically regulate the shit out of everything, cost us all a fortune, and do it badly. Now, if we shut down an agency, what I would propose is we give the employees that year, the agency just shuts down operations and nullifies everything it's ever done, and then that year's budget, we simply make a 300% of salary payout to the employees and tell them good luck. Remember, in anti-politism, there's no income tax. So they're going to take home. So if the average federal salary, and this is really the real number, is $100,000 a year, believe it or not, they make twice as much as the average private sector person. The average federal employee is going to walk away with $300,000. And they're going to walk away with it essentially tax-free, so which is like 5 years under the current taxation plan, because nothing will be taken out for income taxes. And then that'll cushion their blow, and they can go do something else. They can go back to college, get a new degree, start a business, partner up with friends, retire, do what makes you happy, but wipe out the obligations of that and the regulations in particular of these departments and shut them down. We don't need them. The federal government can be much smaller. I mean, if any of you out there watching me now are contemplating a run for Congress, let me make a suggestion for your platform. I'm going to propose no new laws. I'm only going to rescind the stupid ones that already exist. That would be a great platform. Let's just rescind every stupid. It would take forever. We don't have enough time. We're better off just shutting down the entire department and saying all regulations that this department has issued are now null and void. And the amazing thing would be is that the sun would rise tomorrow and the sun would set tomorrow and the air would stay clean and the water would stay clean and the kids would still go to school and everything would be the same, only better, because we would have eliminated a giant, monstrous clawing of debt. But we're not going to do any of that. This is all wishful thinking. I wish it weren't wishful thinking, but it is. And the simple fact of the matter is we're facing hell on earth. So what's going to come next? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't really know any more than you do, but I can tell you what I think. And what I think is, and I've been very clear about this in past podcasts, is I think we're going to have a hyperinflationary depression. What I called in a prior podcast a hyperdepression, which we've never had before. But we've had stagflation in the 1970s. In other words, a recession with inflation, which isn't supposed to happen, but we've had it. And I think this time we're going to get hyperinflation with the recession, or even a depression, a hyperdepression. I don't think things are going to bounce back as fast as people hope for. I hope they do. By the way, let me preface. I hope modern monetary theory is correct. I hope we can spend all these trillions of dollars of make-believe money and it's okay. I was watching, I don't know if you guys watched it, there was a 60 Minutes interview that was done last weekend, actually, a week ago Sunday. So I'm recording this on a Monday, and so yesterday was Sunday. A week ago Sunday, there was a interview of Jerome Powell on CBS on 60 Minutes. And it was a terrifying interview, and it was terrifying because what he essentially said was, what we're going to do is print money. And when asked where does printed money come from, he literally gave an explanation of how he creates money digitally or on paper out of thin air, or in other words, printing press, go burr. I mean, really, it was that simplistic. You know, when Steve, it was Steve Croft is his name. When Steve Croft said, "Hey, where does all this money come from?" He said, "Well, we created digitally." I mean, he literally came right out and said it. And then we buy bonds as if no one could see that, okay, you're creating make-believe money and then you're buying make-believe bonds to maintain it's all make-believe. It's all a giant con game. Con, remember, is short for confidence. And it will only last as long as we have confidence that all of these lies are real. But if the day comes, and the day will come, when we wake up one morning and we realize that we have been lied and lied and lied and lied and lied to, and the whole thing is going to collapse all at once. It's going to happen very, very, very fast, which is why I have urged you, just to review, to buy cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, to start stock in food for at least a year, because there could be massive supply chain disruptions. If COVID has taught us nothing, it's how quickly you can disrupt supply chains. And third and finally, to expand your availability of credit. So if God forbid you need to get your hands on cash fast, you can, while meanwhile you build up cash in the form of cryptocurrency as fast as you can simultaneously. Now look, if you're not doing these things, you're asking for it. If you're going through your life, Pollyanna, saying, well, it's always worked out before, remember, we are on this earth but a short time, and your life experience is not long enough to say this has been working for a long time. This con game has been going on essentially since 1971, when Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard, and we started printing money ad infinitum to back up our welfare state spending, basically. So, while at the same time conducting numerous ground wars around the world during the same period of time. America would be better off, by the way, if we were all Switzerland. I mean, and I'm not saying that we need to change our country and start speaking, German and Italian and French. I'm saying the Swiss have it about right, and the Dutch have it about right. A weak central government, strong local, in Switzerland they're called cantons, here we call them states. Their cantons are about the size of our counties. Remember, Switzerland's a much smaller country, so I'm drawing an analogy, not a direct line comparison, but the cantons retain most of the power. The national government's very, very weak. Everybody, by the way, has a weapon in their house in Switzerland. The Swiss army is basically something that everybody is drafted into and serves, and they literally keep their weapon at home in case someone tries to invade Switzerland, which not even the Nazis tried, because if you ever saw what the Alps look like, you wouldn't try it either. But anyway, having said that, do business with everybody. We should stop worrying about how other countries do their business and just do business with everybody, and let nature take its course. Let the people of the countries worry about whether they're going to fix some Middle Eastern, shithole, while, instead of us, we lose 3,000 people in downtown New York, and then we compound the error by losing 15,000 troops, revenging them. Does that make any sense? To revenge the deaths of 3,000 by killing another 15,000 of our own people, not to mention tens of thousands? I mean, the whole thing is just bizarre. I don't know what we think we are. I don't know. It's time to have a national discussion on who we are, who we plan to be. Are we Rome, or are we Phoenicians? Are we an imperial power, or are we a trading power? And if we're going to be a trading power, which is where I think we ought to be, because life is so much simpler when you're not living everybody else's lives, and no one's going to attack the United States because we're everybody's most important market. If we go to a true free market economy, where we become essentially a giant Hong Kong before the Chinese tried to fuck it up, okay, and we have a free and open free market economy where you can open a business without buying a license, where you can start something from a shoestring, when anybody can do anything as long as it isn't criminal, okay, in other words, infringe on the rights of somebody else. And if we got all the regulation out of the way, and all the excess taxation out of the way, and all the things that hold back our economy, it would explode in prosperity, and the world would do business with us. And yeah, the Chinese would do business with us, and sometimes the Chinese would even fuck us. But when you have so much, remember, when the Chinese steal an idea, it's because their system is so stultifying, so suppressive of creativity, that they have to steal it to have any chance to compete. Which position would you rather be in? Our position, with a plethora of creativity created by even a quasi-free market in our current environment? Or would you rather be the fucking Chinese, led by a single leader who is, suppressing political opposition in Hong Kong, and who, lies about pandemics? I mean, look, let the Chinese be the Chinese. Let the Chinese people throw out that government one of these days. Shouldn't we be a trading power? Shouldn't we abandon this imperial thing that we're involved in? Shouldn't we get the fuck out of all of these places where we spend money we don't have? Shouldn't we stop? Let's talk. And as far as the welfare state goes, isn't it time to grow up and look at each other in the mirror and look ourselves in the mirror and say, you know what? The poor will always be with us. So all these programs to get rid of poverty cannot work. Not only do they not work, they cannot work. And would we all be better off, again, going back to the earlier discussion I was having about the environment, if you look at the poverty reduction numbers, until the mid-1960s and the creation of the Great Society under Lyndon Johnson, poverty was going down at a much faster rate. Then we put in all these anti-poverty programs, and you know what happened? It leveled off. Because we set up a system where you could live in poverty the rest of your life and still, live pretty well. Because remember that our American poor people live better than Louis XIV did and the Sun King at the court of Versailles. They have indoor plumbing, they have air conditioning, they got big screen TVs in most cases, they got smartphones, they have plenty to eat. They have, even if they have to go to shitty health care and stand in line, it's better than being bled to death like they did back in the time of Louis XIV. I mean, just in every possible measurable way, the life of an American poor person is better than the life of the Sun King. And by the way, better than the life of poor people virtually everywhere else. Our poor people are only poor in relativeness to our middle class and our wealthy. But relative to the world, they're wealthy. You can take an American poor person living in a shitty apartment, but at least they have an apartment. And, they might have old appliances, but they have appliances. And they might have, a shitty, noisy air conditioner, but they've got an air conditioner. And the TV might not be the absolute state of the art, but they got a fucking flat screen TV. And their smartphone might not be an Apple, it might be some knockoff brand, but it's still a fucking smartphone and it works great. I mean, just think of how great our poor people live. And we have institutionalized this as a lifestyle. And now we come to a crisis like this COVID-19 crisis, and we're trying to keep all of this shit in the air all at once. We're trying to maintain the welfare state while we spend trillions of dollars we don't have, printing money into the system. It's just going to end so badly, and it's going to happen so fast. Now, the onset day is the question. In my mind, there is no doubt, and I think you would agree with me, there is no doubt that the shit is going to hit the fan. The question is, what will it manifest like and what will it look like? And I think it'll just happen very fast and out of nowhere. I can't possibly tell you it's going to happen a week from now or a month from now or a year from now, but I don't think it's going to be any more than three years from now. In the next 3 years, I promise you, the world as you know it, and as I know it, and as we know it, is going to change. And for that, to have any chance at all to come out of this in one piece as a free nation, we need to be anti-politists. We need to get rid of the Democrats. We need to get rid of the Republicans. We need to get rid of politics. We need to get rid of money in politics. We need to get rid of corruption in politics. We need to get rid of professional politicians. And we need to switch to people with skin in the game, who have done something with their life, who come from the broad section, the racial and religious and cultural soup that makes America great. We need to get everybody involved in it, but not people that seek power, but people that serve from duty and save ourselves. And that's the message I'm sharing with you today. We need to save ourselves from ourselves. We need to get these blood-sucking, mostly lawyer, politician, paid prostitutes out of the way so we can grow a healthy country, a healthy economy, and a healthy future. And with that in mind, I ask you as I close today to click on the subscribe button. Click on the notification button. Pick up your free copy of A Radical Reset, the Manifesto of Antipolitism. It is free to download if you're a Prime member in the Kindle Lending Library. If not, you can spend a couple of dollars and buy a copy in paperback. Read the book. Understand how antipolitism works. And most importantly, after all of that, join the movement. Become an anti-politist yourself. Tell your neighbors, I know we are on the ground floor. I know we are a tiny little group. But we won't be tiny forever. All great journeys start with the first step. And the first step becomes the second, and so on and so forth. And pretty soon, before you know it, we have the momentum we need to save our country. And that's the goal. Save our country, save our culture, save freedom, save liberty, save our savings, save our future, save our children, save our health, save our lives. That's what it's all about. And with that, I'm going to close. And thank you for joining me today. And this is E.H. Ivins signing off.